Hi there, it's Florence here and I'm back again with another episode of my knitting video podcast. Today's episode is going to be a special one, so instead of showing the projects that I'm currently working on, I instead want to do an episode that's focusing on Christmas gift knits. Christmas is, I think, exactly a month away as of filming this, so I think it's a good time to talk about some of the things that I like giving for gifts for Christmas. For this episode, I wanted to specifically focus on things that I have given as gifts before that have gone down really well. So I want to focus on showing patterns that I've knitted before and the yarn that I used to knit them. I'm going to assume that if you're still thinking about what you're going to make, you probably aren't going to knit a jumper. So this video is mostly going to be focusing on winter accessories. I feel like they are something that can be given to a lot of people and most people will enjoy receiving something like that. The problem with filming an episode on gift knits is that I actually don't have a lot of the things that I have made as gifts because they have been gifted. I do have a surprising number actually, mostly because some of these patterns I've made several times and I also have plenty of myself. But I will also put pictures in of things that I've knitted for other people that I no longer have, or things that I've knitted for myself that I don't have to hand. Most of these items I have given as gifts in the past, some others I've just made for myself, but I can still vouch for the fact that the pattern and yarn work perfectly. And quite a few of these I currently have on my needles for various people this Christmas. So I think that's enough of me rambling. Let's get into the video. Oh, before we start, I'll say the jumper that I'm wearing, this is I think it's called the waffle loop sweater. It's by Other Loops. The yarn was gifted, so add yarn gifted by Valentina, who has the yarn shop My Ivory Room, which is my favourite yarn shop in London. It's from Gepard and it's pura lana, which is an alpaca wool blend, and their silk mohair. Just because I know that if I'm wearing a really pretty jumper, which this certainly is, I'm going to get questions about it for sure. I guess I will jump right in and talk about the go-to thing that I tend to knit for people. Hats. I'm sure you have knitted a lot of hats for people before, but I thought I'd share the pattern and yarn that I tend to use when I'm knitting hats for people. I promise not everything in this video will be by Petite Knit. I actually have stuff by a pretty wide range of designers. But for hats, I basically always go for a Petite Knit pattern, and I'm not going to lie about that. The two Petite Knit patterns that I often use to knit hats as gifts for people or for myself are the Oslo hat, which is an all-over stockinette hat with a double-folded or triple-folded brim. I don't have one to hand right now, but I will put a picture in here if you're curious. And then the other one that I've been a big fan of recently is this one. This is the Weekend hat. It's kind of a similar look, except it's rib rather than stockinette, and it is therefore constructed slightly differently. I've definitely got my value for money out of these patterns because I think I've made 4 or 5 Oslo hats, and I think I've made probably also 4 or 5 weekend hats at this point. I have another one drying in my kitchen right now. I'll put one on so that you can see. Let's go for the pink one. This is my one. You can see it looks really, really cute. I knit mine a little bit shorter than the pattern suggests because I don't like having room on the top of my hat, but I think the pattern normally has it being a little bit pointier and sort of off your head at the back, so you can do that if you wish, depending on the preferences of the person you're knitting for. I will say these are not super quick knits. As hats go, particularly DK weight hats, these are pretty slow. They're knitted on 3.5mm needles, both of the patterns. And because this section here is like triple thickness, you actually end up knitting a really long tube. I will show you. This is what it looks like unfolded. So you definitely need to set aside a couple of days to finish a project like this, but I think the result is a hat that looks really clean and really polished. I don't think they look particularly homemade. Okay, let's talk yarn quickly. I only ever use one yarn to knit these hats. This is my go-to gift hat knitting yarn. This is Double Sunday from Sandnes garn. It looks like this. This is one of the Petite Knit colours. It comes in a lot of colours. This is a 100% non-superwash merino wool. Obviously non-superwash, maybe not the best for gifting. I feel like people don't wash their hats that often though, or like are less likely to put a hat through the washing machine, so maybe it's not impossible. The reason I like this yarn is because firstly, I enjoy working with it. Even if I'm knitting a gift, I still don't want to be using yarn that I hate. I'm not going to knit gift knits in acrylic because I just don't enjoy the process, and I am going to be spending a lot of time working on them. This is a real joy to work with. It's super round, super smooth, quite plump. And the other reason that I always use this particular merino is I find it's totally non-scratchy, and I think obviously if somebody is particularly sensitive to wool, maybe it's not suitable, but for people who just generally don't like scratchy jumpers, I've never had anybody find this yarn uncomfortable to wear as a hat. My ex-boyfriend really didn't like wool, he wouldn't wear wool at all. He had several Oslo hats knitted in this yarn that I made him, and he wore them all the time with no issues. In terms of quantities, I think you can get away with maybe 2 if you're doing a shorter version of the medium size of these hats. I would suggest buying 3. These cost probably £6 or £7 each in the UK, so it's about a £20 project, which I don't think is the worst. To go along with a hat, something else that I think is a super popular gift is a scarf, and I have opinions about scarf knitting. I guess when it comes to knitting a scarf as a gift, there are sort of 2 main types of scarf that you can knit. You can do like one of those tiny scarves, think the petite knit Sophie scarf, something like that, or you can do a big chunky winter scarf. I am going to recommend the same pattern for both. This is a pattern by Garn Slicks, and it comes in 2 variations. The brioche bandana, which I don't have to hand, but I'll pop a picture of the one I knitted right here. And then the brioche scarf chunky. They basically are constructed in exactly the same way, just one is small and one is a big chunky winter scarf. I will say I test knitted, I think, both of these patterns. So the patterns were gifted to me, and for this one the yarn was sponsored, but I bought my own yarn for the brioche bandana. Let's talk about little tiny scarves first. The reason why I suggest this one over something like the petite knit Sophie scarf, well, firstly, if you want to knit a Sophie scarf, I'm sure you've already seen it, I'm sure you've already tried it. I have knitted them, they're fine, it's a good pattern. I just like that the brioche used for this particular pattern makes the scarf a little bit chunkier and more sort of substantial. That just makes me happy, and I don't like knitting a lot of brioche, so I enjoy mixing it up and doing something a little bit more interesting for a small project at least. In terms of yarn, for one of those tiny scarves, I basically always use this specific yarn. This is the Cardiff Cashmere Classic. It's DK weight, it's more of a sport weight really, and it's pretty expensive, but with probably 2 of these you can make a decently sized small scarf. You might be able to make a really tiny scarf with 1, I'm not sure. With a lot of these scarves you can sort of increase and keep on going until you've used up half of the yarn, and then start decreasing to finish so that you know you use up every last bit of yarn. Again, I find that this is a joy to knit with. I also think that for a scarf you don't need very much yarn, so it's a nice opportunity to treat yourself to something really special, and it also makes the gift a little bit more special as well. I've said this before, but if you are going to buy a cashmere yarn, if you're going to spend that extra money on cashmere, I think that this one is a great one to go for because it really does feel special. Like, this is noticeably much softer and much fluffier than non-cashmere or cashmere blend yarns, so I think it really does feel like a treat. This colour is baby, it comes in a lot of colours, it's really, really pretty. Okay, so let's move on to talk about the big scarf. If I am suggesting to somebody that they should knit a big scarf, I will basically say always knit a tapered scarf. So don't make something with square ends, make something with pointy ends like this. This is quite funny because I have a pattern that I've written for a square end scarf, but that's a big commitment. If you're gift knitting, or even if you just want a project for yourself that you're not going to hate, a tapered scarf is basically half as much knitting for the same length of scarf. Again, the petite knit Sophie shawl would be another option, but I am a big fan of the brioche scarf chunky from Garn Slicks. This is an oddly fast knit for how large it is. I'm not convinced it's really that much more knitting than the mini scarf bandana version of the pattern. It's just so much chunkier. And this super chunky yarn combined with the big needles and the brioche stitch makes a scarf that feels really substantial. Like, this thing is thick. I'll try and show it just so you get a better look at the pattern. You can see that you kind of alternate what size you increase on along the scarf, keep on increasing until we're halfway, and then decrease on the other side. I honestly wear the scarf pretty much every day in the winter. It's by far my favourite one, and I really want to encourage more people to try out this pattern because I've been so happy with it. In terms of yarn, I don't have a ball of this yarn to show because it's not something I've used for other projects. I've only used it for this, but for this it worked perfectly and I will strongly recommend it. This is knitted in Isager Alpaca 3. It's a chainette alpaca blend yarn. I remember I was test knitting this pattern and I was sent the yarn as a sort of sponsorship, like I was gifted the yarn to test knit the scarf, and I was expecting, based on my past experience knitting scarves, to have like a jumper worth of yarn arrive on my doorstep, because normally a scarf is basically as much knitting as a jumper, right? But then it arrived and I think it had like 3 balls of yarn in it. I don't remember the exact yarn quantity, but I think it was like 3 balls of yarn, 3 50-gram balls of yarn to knit an entire full-length adult-sized scarf, which is just crazy. And it also means that it's not a super expensive project. Again, it's probably roughly a £20 project. And it also means you get to try out an Isager yarn, which, well, they're a really cool company. They make yarn in pretty colours. It's very high quality. And since you don't need very much, it is not too expensive for this project. This is one of my top recommendations. I don't know, I guess I was pretty happy with this scarf when I first finished it and showed it presumably in an old podcast episode, but now I've had it for a year or 2, I can just tell you that I wear this thing every day. It's amazing. I strongly recommend it. Okay, let's go on to something a little bit different. This I haven't gifted to anybody yet, but this is definitely on my gift list for this Christmas, and I've made a few of them for myself. This is a pattern by Rat and Sea Witch. It's called the Ribka pouch, and it is a pouch shaped like a fish. This one is great if you're gifting something for somebody who's into like bag charms and stuff, which I feel is super trendy at the moment with younger people. I sound like I'm old. I'm 24, I'm fairly young still. Anyway, these little fish pouches are very cute. They come together in a couple of hours. They're super enjoyable to knit. They are knitted flat, but I don't find it too unpleasant to knit them flat. And I'm not even going to give yarn recommendations for these, because as long as you're knitting with something that's roughly DK weight, you can use any scraps you have. Tiny quantities are just fine, and I think they also look super cute in multiple colours as well. The pattern includes instructions to knit these little fish pouches to different sizes so that you could use them as a pencil case or an AirPods case if you know somebody who listens to music with AirPods. This one I normally keep a lip balm in, but currently it's empty. And then this one, inside the fish, I have fish-shaped hair clips. They're useful, but also I just think it's funny there are fish clips inside my tiny fish. I don't know. Just to show you in a little bit more detail, they have a drawstring around the top, stockinette here on the face, they have a garter stitch which really does kind of look like scales, and then there's a chart in the pattern to do the twisted rib tail that I think is also really cute. You knit 2 of them, crochet them together around the outer edge. I don't crochet at all and it was still really easy to do. And then you finish off by feeding an I-cord through the little channel at the top. I think these would be really cute if you like made one of these and then you put a lipstick or something inside it, or like a lip balm inside it. That would be a really cute gift. I hadn't thought about this previously, but I'm now thinking I might make one of these as a gift for somebody who I have already bought a lip balm for, so that I can gift the lip balm inside a fish bag charm. That would be really, really cute. Okay, I'll move on and talk a little bit about my favourite thing to make for people this year that I just can't stop making, and that a lot of people have asked me for as well. Let's talk gloves and mittens. Again, like the scarf, there are kind of 2 types of gloves that I tend to make for people. The first would be a fingerless glove, something like this. This is actually one that I gifted to my mum some time ago. Oh, I've put it on the wrong hand. So these have been worn quite a bit. I've just borrowed them back. These I made freehand. I've been saying for like, I think 3 years now that I'm going to make a pattern for these, and I still get messages all the time from people asking if I'll do it. I really should, and I will soon. But as an alternative, if you want to do a more decorative sort of glove like this one has little cables all over it. One that I really wanted to make this year is another pattern by Rat and Sea Witch. It's the same designer who did the fish pouch. I haven't made it yet, but they're called, it's a Polish name that I don't know how to pronounce. I'm going to put the name and a picture belonging to the designer here. I think they're called the Shalotki gloves. I think it means eyelets. Anyway, they're very cute. They have a sort of lace pattern rather than cables, but I'm sure you can find something similar with cables if that's what you're looking for. If you want to make a pair of fingerless gloves like this that are plain, then the most popular pattern that I've made a lot of times that I can really recommend is the penny gloves by Petite Knit. I'll put a picture here. I've made probably 4 pairs. It's another pattern I feel like I've got my value for money from. even though it's a very simple pattern. It's something that you can knit up in, like, I don't know, a couple of hours per glove probably. They're again DK weight on 3mm needles. Both of these fingerless gloves are again things that I'd recommend making using something like this, the Cardiff Cashmere Classic, which is the DK weight cashmere that I also recommended for a tiny scarf. They'd make a very cute set as well, a tiny scarf and fingerless gloves if you want to make a couple of things for people. I should also say there are a lot of other brands that make very similar cashmere yarn. In particular, if you can find the yarn that's called Lang Cashmere Premium, so the brand is Lang, the yarn is called Cashmere Premium, if that's easier to find or on sale or something, it's pretty much identical to this. Either of those would work great. One time, because I was a student and on a budget, I managed to make a pair of the petite knit penny gloves in a sort of shorter length out of one ball of Cardiff Cashmere Light, which is the light fingering weight version. They were quite sort of stretched out over my hands, which was partly because the yarn was too thin, but also just partly because I have huge hands. So if you're on a budget and you're a little bit careful about it, I think you can probably get a small pair of fingerless gloves out of one ball of cashmere yarn, which costs sort of roughly £15. As an alternative, if you don't feel like using cashmere or your budget is a little bit smaller, I would recommend either a really luxurious DK, something like Lana Como, which is a really lightweight merino, or you could use fingering weight in silk mohair. If you just have scraps lying around, I think those would work really well. These are my favourite gift knit this year, and I have another pair of these currently drying in the kitchen, and I'm about to cast on another pair. Mittens. I love knitting colorwork mittens, and everybody who I've showed these to has also loved them. I've had quite a few requests from people to knit these for them for Christmas. Just to give some alternative patterns before I talk about the specific one that I have knitted as gifts in the past. Last year I knitted a couple of different pairs of colorwork mittens by the designer SCARVES. I'll put a picture here of the Marit mittens, I think they're called, that I knitted for my mum for Christmas. And I'll also put a picture here of another pair, I think it's called Vic Favette. I knitted those for myself. I knitted these for myself a couple of months ago and I adore them. I think they're beautiful, and I think these are the perfect mittens to knit. So if you want a pair of colorwork mittens to make as a gift, this is my recommended pair. This pattern is by Maya Åkerström and it's called Alma. The reasons why I love this pattern are, firstly, it's DK weight, so this is actually a really quick knit. Last night I cast on one of these mittens at around 5 p.m. and I managed to have it blocked and still go to bed at like a normal time. So you can knit one of these in an evening, so you can definitely knit a pair in a couple of days if you want to. I'm not a particularly fast colorwork knitter as well. The other reason I love this particular pattern is I really like the way that the thumb is placed. It's a shame I don't have another pair to hand to show you. Normally on mittens, and I think I have showed this in some previous podcast episodes, the thumb is sort of positioned like this. So it's literally, you pick up stitches across the mitten like this and you knit a thumb straight up. With this one, you put more stitches on hold than you cast on after putting the thumb stitches on hold. And as a result, instead of being positioned like this, the thumb sits more outwards like this, which I just find is a much better fit for my hand, and it makes the glove a lot comfier. It means that it doesn't stretch out nearly so much across the palm. And so I find these are a particularly comfortable fit, and I also think that the design is really beautiful. I'd say for a pair of these, for me, I went up a needle size because I have very, very large hands, and I used still, I think, about 100 meters of each color. So it's perfect for scrap DK yarn. In particular, I want to recommend the yarn that I used for that pair. I will certainly be using this again, and would it really be a Florence video if I didn't mention this yarn, because it's cheap and it's wonderful. This is gynt from Sandnes garn. It's 100% Norwegian wool. It's 91 meters per 50 gram ball. These cost about £4 each, so this is maybe like an £8 project. However, when I made this pair, as I said, I went up a needle size. I ended up using like 2 meters of a second ball of the dark blue. So if you would like to do it with one ball of each, I'd either suggest not going up a needle size, or alternatively, I think these would look really cute if you switch the colours for the second mitten. So like have the blue be the main colour on one mitten and then the white be the main colour on the other. I think that would look super cool, and I think that would mean you could probably get it out of one ball of each, although that would be cutting it a little bit fine. I have also just finished making a pair using the Knitting for Olive Heavy Merino, which is worsted weight. That also worked out really well. And I did those also on a slightly larger needle to make the mitten slightly bigger. This is just a great pattern. Maya Åkerström has a lot of really beautiful mitten patterns, but this one has just been my go-to. Oh, I should mention, there aren't Latvian braids around the cuff in the original pattern. I think it's just the corrugated rib. If you just look up a Latvian braid tutorial on YouTube if you want to put them on yours as well. I just did, I think I cast on, did 2 pearl rounds, Latvian braid, then I did the cuff, then another Latvian braid, and then I carried on with the mitten. Obviously skip that if you don't like the way it looks. If I had to recommend something in this video, it would either be that scarf, this one, or some mittens like this. I think these are just like wonderful gifts. I'd be so happy to receive these. I want to mention one more thing just because I feel like it wouldn't be a very thorough knitted winter accessory gifts video without this. The other thing that I'm making for people this Christmas is socks, of course. Now, when it comes to knitting socks for people for Christmas, my recommendation would be to knit a DK weight sock. It's a little bit quicker to do, obviously, which is nice. But also, I find that people really seem to appreciate DK weight socks, particularly non-knitters, because it's something that's a little bit more unique, and also it's just super cozy. And I think a lot of people would prefer to wear a hand-knitted gift knit sock as sort of an extra cozy sock around the house than necessarily when they're out and about. So yes, my top pick for this would be a DK weight sock. This one is my own pattern. It's called the Mountain Walk Chunky. What I would actually recommend is very similar to this, but I don't have it to hand because it's been gifted. The Petite Knit Sunday sock pattern is super popular for good reason. It was actually the first pair of socks I ever knitted, and I knitted it for my sister for Christmas many years ago. They are now very felted because they were knitted in Fingerless Peruvian Highland wool, which I do not recommend. And they are called her Hangxiety socks, and she wears them when she's hungover and anxious. They went down very well. I would definitely knit those for somebody again. It's a super popular pattern, yeah. In terms of yarn, the yarn that I used for this pair I would actually totally recommend. This is from Sandnes garn. I think it's called Perfect. I always get mixed up with the different Sandnes garn yarns, but yeah, I think this is Sandnes garn Perfect. It's a DK weight sock yarn which has nylon in. If I was going to knit like socks for people as gifts, even if they're DK, I'd still want something that is superwash and has nylon in, just because people do tend to like to put socks through the washing machine. Even if I tell them not to, I feel like it's going to inevitably happen by accident at some point anyway. I know the brand Novita also does a lot of very affordable wool nylon superwash sort of sock yarns. Alternatively, you can just use 2 strands of a sock yarn that you already have held together, like a regular fingering weight sock yarn. Just a heads up, if you want to knit full length socks and you're knitting them for someone with larger feet, definitely for men and possibly some women as well, you might want 150 grams rather than 100 grams, just because DK socks do often end up using more than 100 grams of yarn. I wear about a UK size 7 shoe, which is an EU 40 or 41. And this used exactly 100 grams of this sock yarn with very, very little left over. I was quite concerned I was going to run out, so maybe go for 150 grams if you're in doubt. Oh, Regia also does a great DK weight sock yarn with nylon. I wanted to show some other patterns because I know plain rib probably isn't for everyone. If you want to knit a very beautiful and fancy sock, please excuse how these look a little bit worse for wear. These are socks that I wear all the time. This one has faux cables on it, which you can't see that well because I used a hand-dyed yarn. This is a pattern by Jukka. I believe it's called Rookie Winter. It's another really great pattern that I recommend. And I just wanted to show this as a sort of alternative yarn situation. This is, I think it's called Amber from 52 Weeks of Socks Volume 2. I forget the designer's name, but everything will be in the description. This is one where I used like a heavy fingering weight plus mohair. You can totally hold mohair with your sock yarn to make it extra chunky, and I think that's another way of making a sock that feels particularly special, at least if mohair doesn't irritate them or if they're not going to be bothered by having little fibres on their socks, because I realise that might be kind of a sensory nightmare for some people. If you know the person you're gifting it to and you think they'd be into it, it's a great option. I think that's everything I've got today. I hope that this video, which I think has hopefully been a little bit shorter, is helpful to you guys, and I hope it gives you an idea for some gift knits to be working on. Personally, I'm going mittens for everyone, and I think some socks as well. At the very least, I hope it gave you an idea of some gift knits that I've made that I gifted to people years ago and that I've seen be very well used. I don't know. I always gift knit stuff to people whether or not they like it. I'll give them a proper gift as well, and then I also give them something hand knitted because that's how I show my love to people. I just sort of inflict knitwear on them. But I'm sure you guys are better at giving good gifts than I am. Thank you very much for watching. I will be back again soon with a regular podcast episode where I show the non-winter accessory projects that I'm currently working on. And a lot of winter accessories too, most likely. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.